How are you doing today? So, in this session, we'll talk about global temporary tables. So, I already made another video where I quickly spoke about global temporary tables. Why do we need to use global temporary tables? However, I felt like I should explain more in detail as there is more to talk about it and how it can be really used in the practical examples, right? So, how to create global temporary table and what is the syntax? So, it is just like creating any other table. We'll say that create, and instead of just table we'll say that global temporary table, right? And then I'll say that gtt underscore sales of, and then I'll say that sales underscore id number, and then price, which is also going to be number, and then quantity number, and then we have to specify one more attribute, that is on commit. And we have two options when we say on commit: preserve rows, or there's one more option, that is delete rows, right? So there are two options: uncommit preserve rows and uncommit delete rows. Before we speak about these two properties, right? So what is the difference between regular table and global temporary table? A regular table saves the data on the disk the moment you commit, and it is persisted. Even if you restart the database, you're not going to lose the data. However, global temporary table doesn't permanently store the data. It is just specific to the specific session what you are connected to, and the moment you disconnect your session, the data is lost from the table, which means that you don't need to explicitly delete the data. And also, it doesn't get stored onto the disk. Often, global temporary tables stores the data within the SGA itself, and sometimes it could be on PGA as well. Or if the data is really large, it may store the data into the temporary data files, but not the actual data files, right? Hence, tables are always going to be faster compared to the regular tables. However, it is not advised to insert large volumes into the global temporary tables, as they may take the data from SGA and it could impact other applications. And then even global temporary tables also has the same problem, just like any other tables when it comes to the gather statistics. So if you are frequently deleting and inserting the data, even global temporary tables could also have stale statistics, and we may have to gather it. But if the volume is not going to be that higher, then I guess like you don't need to have to do anything. It's not too much skewed. All right, so that's about gather stats problem. Now coming back, so if you look at here, after creating the table, I have specified uncommit preserve rows and uncommit delete rows. What does it mean? So first thing, as I mentioned earlier, global temporary tables are specific to the session when it comes to the data. Table is persisted, but the data is not persisted. It is specific to the session. So when I say uncommit preserve rows, that means even if I commit the data, still hold the data in the table until unless I disconnect the session. Whereas uncommit delete rows means the moment I insert the commit statement, for any reason, the data gets deleted from the temporary table, it is no longer available, even in the same session, right? So that's how the global temporary tables works. So let's look at it, how to create the table and how the data behaves, right? And in fact, I have one more query, which is to identify the session details so that we can compare, like, if two different sessions can have two different sets of data at a time, and whether they are going to overlap, whether they are going to permanently persist or not, and how it behaves when we write the comment, right? Ideally, like if the table is a regular table, the moment you commit, even the other session can also see the same data, whereas global temporary table, the moment you commit based on the property what we specified, we either preserve or delete the corresponding operation. However, is only for the specific session always, right? Now, I'll first create the first table with uncomment temporary table. The keyword table is missing. I'll run the first one and it says that the table already exists. So I'll just drop it. Drop table GTT underscore sale. Now the table is dropped. I'll just create it once again. Now the table has been created, and let's try to query the data first. Select star from GTT underscore sales, right? And there's no data. And let me quickly query my session. So I'll just take the session number. Um, Let me just save it here. This is my session number, right? Uh, format here. I'll save it here. Yes. Now the same query I have opened in another tab. Here you can see, and if I just run it, so this is my session. So now we can see that here the session ID ending with 759, whereas the other session is ending with 6769, right? That means that there are two different connections, two different sessions altogether, and I don't have the data. And if I go to the other tab, and in the other session also don't have the data, right? Now what I'll do is I'll try to insert the data. So insert into GTT underscore sales of sales ID, and then price, quantity, values, sales ID 1, price 10, quantity 2. We'll insert the data. Now one row has been inserted, and if we try to select this data, and we can see that there is a row. Now let's go to the other session. Let's query it here, and still I'm not getting anything. If we just run it here once again, you can see that nothing has been written. Okay, now let's try to commit this session or commit this transaction, whatever you call it as. So I just committed. I'll still select the data, and I can see the data is available. Whereas if I go to the other session, still I don't find the, right. We don't see the data. That means the data is not available in this session. It is only available in the other session. Now what I'll do is I'll get the same. I'll put it to the other session, and instead of 1, I'll make it as 2, and then I'll do select, and we can see that now the sales ID 2, we have one row, and here sales ID 1, we have one row. Let me also, right, and I still see only my session specific data, whereas here I will see the other session specific data, right? So this is how have the data persisted only for that specific session when you use global temporary tables. What we'll do is now we'll quickly try to reconnect. Usually if the table is persisted table, which is like any other table, then when we commit the data, it is always stored in the database, and we won't be losing even if we restart or reset the connection. But let's see what happens with the global temporary tables. But as I mentioned earlier, it is not supposed to be lost, but we'll just give it a try, right? So edit connection, invalidate or reconnect, right? Data source was invalidated, and then I'll try to open it once again. So now let's check what session do we have. So here now the session number has changed, if you see, and we'll go here and we'll run it once again here, and now the session number once again here is different. So let's try to query this table now. Well, the data is lost in this session, and here also the data is lost. That's because we have reset the connection. So this is how it works with the global temporary tables. When you use on commit preserve, even if you commit, you can still see the data in your session. It is not lost, but that won't be visible to other sessions, right? Now what we'll do, we'll create the table once again with on-commit delete rows, and then we'll see what happens, right? So I'm just dropping it, and then I'm creating the table once again, and then I will insert the data. I'll select the data here. 1 minute. I think I have inserted. Let me check it once again. Yeah, I have inserted now. And then I'll do select. Come on commit, delete rows. Okay. Um, this is doing auto commit. Let me see if I can make it manual commit. Transaction mode, manual commit. Yes, this is what we have to do. Now let's check it out. So I'm running the insert once again, and then I will run the select. Now I can see the data, right? So now if you see, I'll commit this transaction. The moment I commit the transaction, this data will be lost. If I do the same select once again, it won't be visible. Let's see that. So I did commit. I'll go and select, and you can see that the data is gone. So this is the feature of global temporary table. You no need to explicitly delete the data from the table. Instead, it will be deleted automatically because the data is only stored at the session level instead of storing at the data file level, which means that technically it avoids any IO, input output. The moment you reduce your IO, your sessions are going to be much more faster while performing. Uh, Problem that we have to be careful whenever we are using global temporary tables, that is, in case if a database has been set, For someone who is not familiar with the connection pool, a connection pool is nothing but like a pool of connections that are always alive, nothing but transactions that are always, and any application who wants to perform some operation, maybe like inserting the data, deleting the data in the database, they can always reuse the existing connections instead of closing and open the new connection. So if the connection pool is set, that means that your connection is alive. And let's say that you have one session using which you have inserted some data into the global temporary tables, and then you did not delete the data later on, and the same session has been given for some other user, and again they are trying to reuse the same global temporary tables. If they look at the table data, they will be able to find the data because the data was not lost, right? In case if the table was created with uncomment, if it is uh, created with delete, then we don't have any problem, even if that has been set up with global sorry, with the connection pool. But if we use uncommitted preserve rules while creating a global temporary table, and if the database has been configured for the connection pool, and if the connection is reassigned to someone else, even if you commit the data, and if the previous session did not delete the data, then the same data seeing it in some other session, some other transaction as well, which is not ideal, right? So that is something we have to be careful, and that's why whenever we work with global temporary tables, before inserting the data, we will always first execute delete operation to delete the data from global temporary table, and then we'll try to insert. Even if is acquired from connection pool, and the previous session would have inserted some data, still that has been deleted successfully, and then we will insert the new data so that there is no conflict or there is no duplication of data, right? So that's about global temporary tables. And when do we need to use global temporary data? Let's say that you have a transaction, the data in a staging table while the transaction is getting processed, and the moment the transaction is completed successfully, you want to dispose the data. In such cases, if you have to write the data into the insert table on the disk, then like you have to first insert the data, and then you have to read the data once again if you want to use it, and then you have to delete the data later on. That means you will end up having three different IOs. First insert is one IO, and then later on retrieving is another IO, and then deleting is another IO. Three operations you have. This happens through the disk memory, which is going to be slower. When it comes to OLTP transactions, even subsequent latency is also important. In such kind of cases, global temporary tables compared to the regular persisted tables on the disk. Hence, people will go with the global temporary tables. If you have any questions, do let me know. Feel free to comment in this video, and I'll be there to help you. Or if you have also used global temporary table, feel free to comment for what reason did you use global temporary tables, and if there is anything that is deviating from what I said, do feel free to let me know. I can correct myself. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye bye.